Hello, everybody. Spain calling, or rather Europe calling. My name is Jürgen, and I'm speaking to you from the European Parliament office in Madrid, or rather from my home, as you can see. I welcome you all to our transnational online conference on Euroscepticism, and it really is a European exercise, as the Parliament offices in Italy, France, Hungary, and Spain put this together in a joint effort with speakers from all those countries participating, giving their national take on the topic. And of course, we have you, the international audience from across Europe. The debate is inspired by the book Euroscepticism and the Future of Europe. Paul Scmidt, the coordinator of the book, is going to be your moderator today. When he is not coordinating books, Paul is Secretary General of the Austrian Society for European Politics in Vienna, so we even add some Austrian flavor to the whole mix. And of course, we want you, the viewers, to participate in this debate. You can send your questions to the email address that we put here on screen, and Paul will try to address them during the webinar. Paul, I will hand over the whole business to you in a minute. But first, let me introduce you all to the European Parliament Vice-president Othmar Karas. Vice-president Karas, you were also in the book Euroscepticism, and I think ensuring a good future for Europe is, of course, part of your day-to-day work as one of the leading figures of the European Parliament. Vice President, it's an honor for us to have you with us today, and to open this event, I give you the floor.
Dear ladies and gentlemen, dear Europeans, congratulations, Paul. Can you switch up the microphone? The other, it's very loud. Excuse me, thank you very much. No? So, again, who has the microphone open? It's very loud. Thank you. No. One more. Thank you. Dear ladies and gentlemen, dear Europeans, firstly, congratulate Paul Scmidt to this book. It's not the first one, but it's a very important instrument to discuss this issue European-wide. I think it's an issue for the future of the European Union, must be a part of the debate about the future of the European Union, is not only looking to the past. I think it's a very important dossier for our democratic debate we have to do in the European Union. Thank you very much for your invitation. I'm very pleased to be with you today with this new format. In view of the conference of the future of Europe, which will hopefully start soon, this book comes just at the right moment. It is an ideal basis for the debate on what response the European Union needs to give, what actions to take in order to gain the democratic majorities to do the right and the necessary. I would like to thank the editors, in particular Paul Scmidt again, the experts in the member states, as well as the events organizing liaison offices for helping so shed light on the important issue of Euroscepticism and the future of Europe. In the recent months, there have already taken place numerous online discussions on this STEPSA book. But this event is a premiere. For the first time, such an event is organized by 4 of our European Parliament's liaison offices in Hungary, Italy, France, and Spain. This gives us the opportunity to approach this topic from different perspectives. We know that Euroscepticism has many different phases all over Europe. I would not reduce it to exclusively Eurosceptic parties. In my eyes, the problem is not that 26.2% of members in the European Parliament are Eurosceptic. Quite the contrary, Euroscepticism does not divide Europe into left and right. It divides all parties, and I think it divides more than less our societies. This also concerns parties which are considered to be pro-European. You can clearly see this in the debate on the MFF, the Next Generation EU Recovery Plan, the refugees on the Greek islands, the indexation of family benefits, just to name a few. On these issues, even parties in government, which are traditionally pro-European, are playing with Euroscepticism, or they are Euro-populists. It is definitely easier to blame the European Union than to communicate the benefit of the European compromise. It is much easier to blame the European Union on the one hand and to defend the national interests against the European solidarity on the other hand. For me, Europe stands for compromise, for understanding another better. Europe does not just mean yes or no. I am convinced that we need, in addition to fact-based information, dialogue, an exchange of ideas, the respect for and solidarity with each other. For me, Europe is a community of rule of laws, is a community of common values, is a community of solidarity. Europe is more than the addition of national interests. Europe needs a better understanding, need to communicate the benefit and our common goals, and need the global development and challenges. According to the Eurobarometer survey conducted after the EP elections, the most important issue for the general public were economy and growth, climate and chance, and human rights and democracy. These are horizontal issues that no member states can tackle alone. The current health crisis has demonstrated this even more clearly, and also the climate challenge or the refugees issue. This is why I have great hope in the upcoming conference. For me, it's more a dialogue on the future of Europe. Not in a closed building, open, transparent with our European citizens. And for me, this conference about the future of Europe must involve the wide public. We are all in this together. Therefore, let me wish you a fruitful discussion, and let me thank you once again for your commitment to organize this joint event. Even though I cannot stay with you until the end, I would be grateful to hear about your conclusions and outputs. Europe is never ready. Europe is our vision, was our vision in the past. Europe is our vision today, and Europe is our vision in the future. Thank you very much and good luck.
Thank you very much, Mr. Vice President. We're very grateful for your input, for opening up our debate here today. And we know that you have to move on to the next meeting that you have. But before we let you go, can we, would you allow us to ask you a follow-up question and somehow use this opportunity to ask you, because with organizing this debate, we've already received many questions regarding the issue, and I would like to take the first one and just pose it to you. It is from Mr. or Mrs. Maya from Hungary, and she or he asked, what are the reasons for the success of the Brexit? Why did it happen? And why did the EU, why did member states not organize any effective countermeasures?
Thank you for the question. I think the Brexit is a good example for that what I mentioned. The Brexit provides dramatic evidence of the way in which elections can be won on the back of lies, without solving a single problem. On the contrary, with their march towards an irresponsible opinion-led democracy, the Brexiteers dragged the UK into unprecedented political chaos, without thinking ahead to how they would get the country out of the mess they had engineered. The political leaders took a gamble with the fate of ordinary people, the country and the EU, and then left people to pick up the pieces alone. Today, 4 years after the referendum, the Brexiteers have yet to deliver on a single promise, and I was sitting in the hemicycle of the European Parliament near Mr. Farage. He is one of the speakers of the Brexiteers. And he always said he is playing a game. He always said it's better for the European Union, for the United Kingdom to be part of the European Union. But for him and his political party and the election result, is much easier to blame the European Union. At the moment, you see it, the Brexiteers and also the government of Mr. Johnson, what is his wish? To be part of the single market, not generally, only for some products who are in the interest of the United Kingdom, on the one hand, but he will not accept the European rules, the European standards, the European values. He will do what he wants inside the European Union. That is against our competitiveness, is against our common rules. And he is looking, the price can be to have a weaker Friday agreement, a danger situation in Ireland, and the European Parliament and the European Union cannot accept it. But to the last sentence, the last part of your question, I think it is not the time to answer with sanctions. Sanctions are not the European answer. We have negotiations, and the agreement must be not a compromise. The agreement must be a result of accepting the European rules and the European standards. That is our point. And not more, not less. If we have a hard Brexit, the sanctions for the United Kingdom is the Brexit, not what we are doing with them, what they did for their own citizens. And to lie, don't say the citizens, yes, the right things and the facts. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much again, Vice-president Othmar Karas. Thank you also for your commitment, and thank you for writing the foreword to this book, Euroscepticism and the Future of Europe, Views from the Capitals, the book which was just published. We will now move to the debate, and let me just say that the basis for the debate is actually this book, because on the panel we have 4 discussants today, and 3 out of the 4 discussants are actually authors in this book. And I have to say, I wrote the Austrian chapter as well, so if you have questions on that, I could have passed it on to the Vice President, but he's now gone. But if you have questions, I'm happy to try and answer them. The book has 3 editors, apart from myself, Michael Keding and Johannes Pollack. And it is published within the framework of TAPSER, the Trans-European Policy Studies Association. Why do I say that? I say that because it is a compilation of country analysis. It is a sort of a travel guide through the different national political landscapes, through the diversity of Europe. And you can just pick and choose one country, from Iceland to the Ukraine, from Switzerland to Spain. It is the EU 27 plus neighboring countries, plus the countries from the Western Balkans, together 40 countries which are analyzed in short and concise and easy to read articles. And you just can pick and choose and look what is happening actually with Euroscepticism. How is it defined, for example, in Denmark? Or what does it look like in Greece? What is the stage of political development, the party political situation in one of the other countries, and what is the impact of Euroscepticism? And I think the Vice President has mentioned it. The impact of Eurosceptical rhetoric goes way beyond the strength of Eurosceptical political parties. It is copied and pasted by many others when they feel that they can make points at home to win elections. And so you have many different shades of Euroscepticism, and that's where the book gives an insight on the different faces, as the Vice President said of Europe and of Euroscepticism within the European Union and beyond. And the book is just the basis for many discussions which we hold in many of the 40 countries and of the 40 analysts which are involved in this book project. And as was stated before, this is a very special discussion because it goes very much across border. It includes authors from different countries and the offices of the European Parliament from different countries as important partners. Now, ready to start. We have the best lineup that you could actually imagine for this issue at the moment. We have Eleonora Poli from Italia. She's senior fellow at the Istituto Affari Internazionali in Roma. Welcome, Eleonora. Ciao.
Hello.
We have Andras Inotai from Budapest. He's the former Director General of the Institute for World Economics and professor in international economics. He's the author of the Hungarian article. Welcome, Andras. See ya. Good to have you here. And we have Gilles Ivaldi from France. He's a researcher in politics at the Sciences Po in Paris. Gilles, bienvenue. Thank you for joining us. And of course, we have our friend from Spain, Ignacio Molina. He's senior analyst at the Elcano Institute in Madrid, and he, of course, published with us the piece on the Spanish political landscape. Ignacio, gracias por estar con nosotros. We're going to start right away. Eleonora, let me start with you. You have an interesting title in your article, and it's probably still the case. The question you're posing is, has Salvini saved Italy from himself? So that's the tricky question. And I wonder if your answer to this question has changed over time. How do you see the status quo in Italy, in particular also against the background of the health and economic crisis which we're in at the moment with the COVID-19? What is the situation with the disenchantment, with the Italian disenchantment with the European Union? Eleonora, the floor is yours, but before I give the floor to you, let me just tell the audience that please send your questions. We try to be as interactive as possible over the next 60 minutes. And I will try to integrate the questions into my Q&A session here. Eleonora, now the floor is yours.
Hello, thank you very much. Thank you, Paul, for introducing the panel and for the questions. And the answer is still the same. Salvini, not yet. If you take a picture of Italy today, you will see that the first and most diffused feeling is still fear and sort of outrage. People are scared about the COVID-19 pandemic. They are concerned about the economic crisis. 55% of the Italians believe that Italy will not recover from the current pandemic crisis, the consequences of the pandemic over the economic crisis. And then also there are the usual problems. So, problem within integration of the migrants. We have around 20,000 migrants arriving to Italy, of which only 170 were relocated. And so, the idea that basically European member countries and Europe is not solidar towards Italy. Actually, if you look at the polls, you will see that according to the Eurobarometer, we have just 28% of the Italians actually trust the EU. In May 2020, during the pandemic, the first phase of the pandemic, around 71% of the Italians believed that the European Union had failed Italy again. And all this fear and Euroscepticism and outrage basically is well used by Eurosceptic parties. We have Salvini on the one hand, which is the leader of Lega, the first, not just the first Eurosceptic party in Italy, but the first party at the moment, according to the poll, is actually enjoying 25% of the electoral support. And we have Brothers of Italy, which is a right-wing party, and is actually quite Eurosceptic. And it has around 50% of the support and is the third party according to the poll. The situation in Italy is quite strange because we are led by a government which is formed by the Democratic Party and the Five Star Movement, which is not per se anti-European. The Prime Minister is not anti-European, is actually quite pro-European, but the majority of the Italians at the moment are quite Eurosceptic, or they don't trust the European Union. They think the European Union is not helping Italy. And Eurosceptic parties are building on this. Things will change probably with, the next generation Europe and the actions the European Union is putting in place. But we will need time. At the moment, the Italians still in April, 2020, the majority of the Italians considered, according to the poll, France and Germany as enemy, while China and Russia as a sort of ally or friendly country. And this is rather shocking, considering also the amount of solidarity that in the end we received by not just by the European Union but also by European member countries. And this is a matter of lack, or you can see bad communication from European member countries, or good propaganda from China and Russia. On the one hand. On the other hand, we have, Eurosceptic parties such as Lega and Brothers of Italy building on Euroscepticism in order to use the European Union as a scapegoat on and acquire, more legitimacy in Italy. There is another problem. Although the government in Italy is not at the moment Eurosceptic, at regional level, the majority of the regions are controlled by a coalition government led by Lega and Brothers of Italy. So local governments are led by Eurosceptic parties, and they are influencing more and more the way people perceive, what the European Union is doing for them. Because of course, regional government, especially now that we are living in a sort of semi-lockdown situation, so we can move, but it's very difficult to travel, and people tend not to exit from basically their city. In this specific time, regional governments are playing a crucial part in, informing the citizens about all the initiatives that have been created, and this is not helping the European cause, of course. There is a level of responsibility, of course, from the European Union and European member countries. It's true that at the beginning of the pandemic, solidarity was not shown, especially in the first month. But it's also true that Italy was the first country to be hit by the pandemic, and it was still not sure what was this COVID-19. It was still many citizens, even in Italy, did not believe that this was a pandemic or this would have the consequence that we are seeing today. The problem in Italy is that the COVID crisis will be surely transformed into an economic crisis, and the country is already badly hit from an economic point of view. In 2019, already in 2019, 1 every 12 person in Italy was affected by extreme poverty. In September and October, we have 23% of the people, asking for food help. So for, to provide with food. Well, 43% of the people that asked were new people, people that came for the first time to ask for this kind of help. And when you ask, food, it means that you are in a state of extreme poverty, because it means it's a primary necessity. And the people that have been mostly hit by the economic consequences of the crisis are the youth and women. This, of course, is basically hitting the basis of the society, and will have repercussions, especially considering that if the youth normally, or the young people, are the one mostly pro-European because they saw the benefit, they can see the benefit, it's easier for them to see the benefit by, for instance, the simple fact that they can travel abroad by using just the ID card, or maybe because they speak better English, that they can access to different kind of information, or can make friends abroad. So normally they are the most pro-European. If this part of the society is so badly hit by the economic crisis, this part of the society will be an easy target for Eurosceptic parties to build again a new sort of electorate. And this is what, many Salvini and Brothers of Italy are doing. At the same time,
Eleonora,
yes?
Eleonora, can I just interrupt you and ask you a follow-up question, because there are questions coming in,
Yes.
and I think they very much go together with what you are saying here. There's a question on EU-China relations, and I would like to transpose this question a little bit. You've mentioned at the beginning of your statement that the image of quick Chinese help and also help from Russia was perceived as being much more positive than what the EU is doing in terms of aid, because it took EU member states and the European Union, they were caught by surprise, and it took them some time to coordinate and decide upon quite a substantial aid package, but they had a time lag there. Now, how is, from an Italian point of view, how are those EU-China relations perceived? And in the end of your statement, you also mentioned poverty, inequality, which is on the rise because the health crisis is already leading to a deep economic crisis. And there, the next generation EU financial aid package comes in. Do you think that those European financial aid instruments can actually make a difference in that perception?
Okay, let me start with the next generation package. I'm sure that this will certainly change the perspective. It will not completely transform the Italian panorama from one day to another. It's not that from being the most Eurosceptic countries tomorrow Italy will become Europhile, but consider that Italy used to be one of the most Europhile countries in the European Union. We started to become more and more Eurosceptic since the last economic crisis, and I believe that if the economic condition in Italy, mostly inequality, the problem of inequality and lack of perspective for the youth will change thanks to European, of course, plans, I'm sure that this perspective will be challenged because it will leave Eurosceptic parties without a very powerful argument. Today, they've been building their campaign on migration and basically economic issues. If we take out of the picture the economic issues and we are trying to solve at the same time the migration crisis, I believe that there is there is, of course, a good chance for rebuilding a sort of trust in the European Union among the Italians. As far as China and Russia is concerned, the problem is that China and Russia are not perceived as, well, Italians understand that China and Russia are not democratic countries and they represent a risk basically for Italy. But at the same time, they're not perceived as a challenge because they are far away. Basically, they're not like Germany or France that are neighbor countries and can interfere through the European Union. This is the perception of general people, through the European Union into national politics. It is clear to the majority of the Italians that help from China and Russia did not come for free, but at the same time they prefer this. They prefer, to have, this kind of help from China and Russia, and it's clear that it's not for free, than to, believe in that the European Union is helping them without any cost. They also believe that the European Union is trying somehow to influence basically Italian politics or Italian sovereignty. At the same time, also, China and Russia were better in propaganda, in communication, but this is also part of the way of doing politics. And I'm sure that other European member countries and the European Union itself was more concerned in doing instead of speaking about what it was doing.
Thank you, Eleonora. We will talk a little bit more about that later on, but you have mentioned propaganda, and I want to give the floor to Andras now. Andras, yes. Hungary is an outlier. It's an exceptional country in the sense that you have a very strong governmental anti-EU rhetoric, which meets a public opinion which is very in favor of EU membership and EU integration. How does this go together, and what is the status quo in terms of confrontation between Hungary and EU values and the rule of law?
Well, thank you very much for the invitation. I will come back to your question, of course, but let me start with congratulating you and the European Parliament and all those who have been coordinating this discussion. I am very pleased to participate in this discussion, and I have to add that we have already had one bilateral discussion on this issue with our Slovenian colleagues a month ago. And I'm very glad to continue this discussion now with Italian, French, and Spanish colleagues today, particularly because what we already see, the book we have published, and you have mentioned, you have also shown, is about Euroscepticism and the future of Europe. The book was published, and my contribution as well was written, the final version 1 year ago, on the basis of the European elections. And I think that most of the analysis we have found at that time as the result of the European election, the parliamentary elections, is valid today even more than before. What has become very clear for me is that in 2019, European citizens voted for the next 5 years of the European Parliament, but most of them were, including all the citizens and the parliamentary members, were not very aware of the fact that it is not about the 5 years. It is about a historical crossroads of Europe. Either we can do something very important in the next 5 years with Europe, or we will be facing a lot of challenges and problems we had not been aware of at the moment of voting. So some people say it was Europe was facing a so-called Hamiltonian moment. I'm not sure, but that is clear that we had been and we are at the historical crossroad. And this is just an introductory remark. Now, the next question I would like to address is we have to be very clear about Euroscepticism. Euroscepticism has two very different roots. There is one, and I will show it on the Hungarian political picture, how different it is. One is, I am Eurosceptic because there is too much EU interference in my domestic issues. The European Union should disappear, except of money, of course, disappear from our national legislation. We have our own rights, our national pride, etc. Please, no interference. This is, and then Euroscepticism is, in this case, is based on too much interference by the EU and the lack of national solidarity, national sovereignty. Come back onto this issue. On the other hand, Euroscepticism has a different truth. Namely, those who are much more for a more integrated, more federal, more global Europe, they see the European Union that it is not using its competences already given by law, or are not able to implement European level policies in the critical issues, from migration to security, from environment to etc., etc. Now, one side is Eurosceptic because there is too much European influence. On the other hand, there is another group, and a growing group, which sees that we would like to have more Europe. But unfortunately, somehow, the European is not satisfying our expectations. It is also going to or leading to more Euroscepticism. That's the next issue, the Hungarian party structure. In the European election, parliamentary elections, the ruling party with two-thirds majority in the Hungarian parliament, got 13 votes. Altogether, Hungary has 21. 13 votes, one more than before, but 3 less than it was expected. So, on the other hand, other 4 parties got altogether 8 member seats. There had been a shift within Hungary concerning the future of Europe. The ruling party, Fidesz, which is still member, although a suspended member of the European People's Party, got 13, but shifted very much to the right or the far right, Euroscepticism, or sometimes even anti-EU attitude. On the other hand, 7 of the 8 other members are absolutely pro-Europe. Some of them even, particularly the Democratic Coalition, to what extent it is right or not, they are right or not is another question, to an federal Europe as soon as possible, but all the others for Euro, accepting the Euro and having a more European cooperation and solidarity. And what is interesting that the previously far right and anti-EU, absolutely nationalistic party, Jobbik, which can be translated into English either right or better in Hungarian, maybe better, they shifted from the right side to the middle, and they are accepting now the European Union as the future of Hungary. So this is the party side. What is on the citizen side, and that is I try to respond or answer your question. It is very interesting. There's a big gap. It is a material gap and a not yet fully realized mental gap between the society and the ruling party. The ruling party is very Eurosceptic or sometimes anti-European. I will come back to it immediately. And the 70% of the Hungarian population, one of the most EU-friendly or EU-supporting population in the European Union, 27, is pro-European. We should not forget about the main benefits Hungary has got. It has unfortunately not been analyzed in depth, more profoundly, that we have been a main beneficiary of the 4 freedoms of the European Union, including with the rather, I would say, a critical balance of 600,000 Hungarians working in the European Union, not only as a result of income differences. That is the big difference. In 2010, about 6 years after Hungary's membership, about 100,000 Hungarians were working in the EU countries. In the last 10 years, 500,000 went to Western Europe, and not just for income difference, for very different reasons. And I would like to go into detail here. What has been several times forgotten or not mentioned is that Hungary, as in per capita terms, is the largest net beneficiary of EU funds. The largest one. Without EU funds, the Hungarian budget, it would not function. It is another question how the EU funds have been spent, stolen, misused, etc., etc. But so there is a big gap between the general perception of Hungarians, very much in favor of the EU, and the Eurosceptic, and sometimes even anti-EU, open anti-EU behavior of the government. I could mention a lot of examples here. I wouldn't like to go here into details, but something that I find extremely
Andras, I
Yes.
hate to interrupt you. We try to solve some of those questions in the second round.
Yes, but
we
yeah,
won't be able to go into detail very much now, but maybe 2 or 3 elements. Why is this gap so obvious between what the public thinks about the European Union and the anti-EU rhetoric?
well, it is because of I think three factors. One is the media dominance in the province of the government. People practically do not get the right information about the EU, and I would say opposition parties are also involved in this issue in the negative side. Second, it is the European Union, which has sometimes very clear rules, basic values, etc., which some people do not understand and which have not been implemented. Although the EU has competences to do that, but it is reluctant. And even if something happens, the Court of Justice, etc., it happens in a period of 3 years. Forget about it. If it doesn't happen at the same moment when a violation of the law happens, then in 3 years' time, forget about it. And good morning. Somebody said it, the Prime Minister, otherwise, several years ago, not because of the EU. And the third is a general problem, and that is what I wanted to mention, because it's not just a Hungarian problem. It is a worldwide problem, and it is a specifically EU problem. The growing gap, mentality gap, not economic, mentality gap between the metropolitan areas and the rural areas. Why is it so? That in Vienna is different from Austria. Warsaw is and the large Polish cities are very different from Poland. Budapest and some cities are very different from Hungary. Munich, Berlin, etc. are different from Bavaria, etc. New York is different from the United States. Mumbai is different from India, and I would like to continue. But here we have this discrepancy, and this is one of the biggest challenges for the future of the European Union. How can we coordinate or reconcile rural and metropolitan areas' interests? It is not only a question of regional aid, which has been helping very much for the catching up of several European lagging behind regions in the last decades, from Spain, Greece, Italy, up to Hungary, Poland, etc. It is not the question is not an economic catching up. The question is much more a mental catching up. And here is my last point. It is identity. I cannot accept the issue in any country of national sovereignty. We are not sovereign. Not even the United States are sovereign. But we should be very proud of our national identity, not national sovereignty. These are two different issues. With no sovereignty, we are interdependent. Everybody is highly interdependent. Whether this interdependence is balanced or not balanced, whether it is just economic, security, social, etc., historical or other, it is another question. But it is an interdependence, and that is something we have to understand. But with the national identity, we have to create, and this is the real challenge for the Europe, for the future of the European Union, how to create a European identity. European identity is not against national identity. Both are accompanying and complementing themselves. They are enriching themselves. Without a strong European identity, we can take, in the best case for the future, all the European steps, more federal structures, abolition of national veto rights, etc., etc. Everything can be, it is accepted, I very much am for it, but it can only work if it is supported by the large part of the citizens convinced of having a European identity with national identity as that. And this is, I think, the future, the crucial issue for Europe, not legislation, but psychological and mental preparation for the 21st century of Europe as a global player.
Thank you very much, Andras. Or as they say in Hungary, köszönöm szépen. I think you're very, very right. I mean, it probably takes time, but one shouldn't exit the right path, the integration path. It takes time to build a European identity, and it is not either or. It is that people have various identities. I myself, for example, I feel very Viennese.
It is mutually supporting.
I feel very Austrian, but I also feel European. And then I have my daughters, which are Spanish. So I sometimes feel very Spanish. And with this, I want to give over to Gilles, not because he's from Spain, but because he's from France. And
I couldn't quite see the link there.
Because somehow, Gilles, on a serious note, I mean, I think today we all feel more French because of what has happened today with the 3 horrible terrorist attacks and murders in Nice, together with what happened a couple of days ago. I think I can talk maybe for everyone that all our sympathies are with France today and with the victims and the families of the victims. I think that's a difficult day, and in these difficult times, it is more important than ever to stick together, because this is not a French only issue. This is a European issue and can happen everywhere, and we've seen it happening in many other places. Gilles, but coming back to the issue of Euroscepticism, and somehow, I mean, this is all connected. Many things that Andras has said also hold true for other countries. The question is how important is this national identity? How domestically driven are European politics? How big is the gap between the cosmopolitan cities and the rural areas? The European integration is also about cohesion and security. What is your assessment of the situation in the country which you know best? We know that France is one of the few countries where you also have a radical left, which might not be as strong as the radical right in its anti-European politics, but still there's a combination here. And they have been quite strong in the presidential elections in the past. What is the status quo today, and how does, for example, the health crisis, but also in combination with the migration and integration and even religious issue, how does it all interfere with each other?
Okay, well, thank you so much, and thank you for having me. Just to say, I wasn't one of the book experts. I didn't write the chapter, so I'm sort of stepping in for Céline Belot, who's my French colleague who wrote the chapter and who couldn't be with us today. So Yes, you're right. Maybe one interesting feature of Euroscepticism in France is that we have this sort of classic U-shaped, distribution across the political spectrum, and we do find Euroscepticism on both ends of the political axis, on the far right, of course, but also on the radical left. And that's something which is very interesting. And you're also right to say that both the radical left, Jean-Luc Mélenchon, France Insoumise, and the radical right, Marine Le Pen's Rassemblement National, did pretty well in the 2017 elections. And actually, if you take all Eurosceptic parties, I mean, these are the two big ones, but we do also have, far left parties, which are rather Eurosceptic, and other sovereignist parties on the right of the French political spectrum. And if you take all those parties together, they polled nearly half of the presidential vote back in 2017. So Euroscepticism is a big thing in France. And it has been a quite an important feature of French politics since the mid-90s. Now, the other thing I would like to mention is that something else major happened in 2017, which you all know of course, is the emergence of Emmanuel Macron on the French political stage and his new movement, La République En Marche. And Macron has taken a very clear, centrist, liberal, pro-EU stance in French politics. And this, I think, has increased polarization over European issues in France. And now we clearly have this major axis of conflict between Macron and Le Pen, which is, as we speak, structuring French politics very, very strongly, and which sort of resonates with your question about cosmopolitan versus rural or semi-rural areas, because we do find that those electorates for Macron and Le Pen, they are distributed, they are clustered geographically in different areas. And clearly Macron does very well with the urban, younger, more educated, and more bourgeois electorate in big cities. So we do have this polarization over EU issues. But now what we have in France is, as you may clearly understand, is a completely different political agenda. I mean, like elsewhere, the COVID crisis has taken over. This is clearly the big issue on the political agenda. And as you all know, we are now in national lockdown since yesterday. Well, we'll be in national lockdown tomorrow, but it's been decided yesterday by the French government and President Macron. So these are clearly the issues that's sort of, taking over issues of European integration or other issues. So right now, if I try to see what may happen next, and we're talking about the 2022 elections, we've got different possible scenarios, or different factors or different dimensions that I think are worth mentioning today. The first one is something which is structural in French politics. It's this deep, profound layer of political discontent that we've been experiencing for so many years, which I think is quite similar to what you may find in Italian politics. And Eleonora, I think, mentioned that earlier on. And we have this, and the Yellow Vest movement pretty much exemplified this 2 years ago or last year. We have this, profound political distrust of institutions, of political elites and parties. And this is quite similar to what we see in terms of how people see the EU. Right now, French citizens, they are very distrustful of the EU. I think about a third of them trust the EU, and they are extremely dissatisfied with the way, or at least they say they are dissatisfied with the way that democracy works at EU level. So there's some sort of correspondence between national political discontent and what's happening in terms of voters' views and attitudes towards the EU. Now, the thing is that the issues that are topping the political agenda, health crisis, just like in Italy actually, health crisis, socioeconomic crisis, and for France, clearly terrorism is now a big, big issue. All these issues will be paramount in the next elections. Clearly, terrorism, immigration, integration, the socioeconomic crisis. So the two questions are as follows. The first one is, will the health crisis be over? If the coronavirus situation continues, then I think Euroscepticism will be less easy for parties such as the Rassemblement National to politicize, because people will be very scared. And we know from experience that when people get scared, they turn to more mainstream parties with greater credibility, more competence, they are more reassuring. So that's one question, whether it will be the politics of fear if the health crisis continues, or the politics of anger if the health crisis is over by 2022 and then people are just angry. And in that case, let me say we have potentially the perfect storm for a far-right major success in France, because we will have the combination of what we know to be the most important factors for far-right success in this country: a deep, unprecedented socioeconomic crisis with what we expect to be a major rise in unemployment, a strong terrorist threat, which is now clearly linked with immigration, and that's what has changed from the past. Many years ago, Jean-Marie Le Pen used to say crime and immigration are the same, but people could very easily dispel that myth. But now, clearly with Islamic terrorism, people link immigration and security. So this is a major issue. And then, of course, we will have this surge of discontent, because right now all those people who are very unhappy with the political system and the political elites in France, they keep quiet, if I may say, because they're under this sort of huge health crisis that sort of stops any political discussion. But in the future, the combination of those three elements, political discontent, immigration, identity, terrorism, and a deep socioeconomic crisis, that could be the perfect storm for far-right success, and therefore for Eurosceptic success in France.
Well, that's definitely an explosive mix and a breeding ground for new waves of Euroscepticism. And it reminds me of something that Andras said before, that for some it's just way too much integration, and for others it's just not enough. So you have disappointments because of the expectation management. Thank you, Gilles. Merci. And that leads me to Ignacio. Nacho, talking about expectation management, I mean, that's something that you have also put in front of your article, the question of whether Spain just expects too much from the European Union in terms of solving its problems and its challenges. How do you connect this to the current situation?
Well, first of all, well, it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you very much, Paul, for your role as a chair. Thank you very much to the European Parliament for organizing the meeting, and of course to all the other speakers and people watching us. It's a real pleasure to be part of this project on views from the capitals to the future of Europe. Well, yes, you are right. You are right that in the chapter on Spain, I deal with a paradox. The paradox that perhaps the too pro-European sentiment in Spain may be a risk. The risk that all political parties in Spain expect too much from the European Union. And it's obvious that if they are so different, I mean, ideologically, they expect very different things. And if you expect very different things, it's very easy to lead to frustration. So to analyze, to understand the Spanish situation, we have to start with how the Spanish political landscape is so confrontational. We have basically a political system with all the majoritarian features in which confrontation is the most important feature of the functioning of the Spanish political system. Very few issues in which we can find consensus. European integration is one of those very few issues in which Spanish political forces and Spanish society share the view of Europe as the solution of the Spanish problem. And it has to do with the history, has to do, of course, with a very difficult 20th century, with the Civil War, with a long dictatorship, actually 2 dictatorships. In the second half of the 20th century, the narrative that modernity, democracy, welfare, prosperity, security comes from Europe, comes from normalized Spanish situation to fill the gap with the most advanced Western European countries. So in the Spanish narrative, in the Spanish discourse, political and social discourse, the idea of to be European is like the solution to the problems. Of course, if you are from a conservative party and a conservative voter, if you are a progressive party or progressive voter, you are a far right voter, or you are a left wing anti-establishment party. And I'm talking about the different parties of the Spanish political landscape: Podemos on the left, the Socialist Party, a social democratic party, the PP, conservative one, Ciudadanos, a liberal one, and Vox as a far right. You had very, very different views on that. Even if you are so, even if this confrontation and there is this centrifugal political competition, Europe is still an issue in which you find this consensus. But it's true that with Vox, with the merging of Vox, only 2 years ago, Vox was not present in any parliament, national or regional parliament. But at the end of 2018, they appear also as a Spanish nationalist backlash because of the events in Catalonia linked to the independence conflict. And now Vox is the third party according to the last election and according to the latest polls, and they are more or less 15% of voting. Even if at the beginning Vox tried to be a soft version of Euroscepticism, and I have to say that you, as an editor, you told me last year that Vox was going to evolve very rapidly towards a much more hard Euroscepticism. You were right, and I was wrong. You were right, but the chapter, the forecast of the chapter is that Vox was going to become more Eurosceptic. And last week we have a very interesting parliamentary debate in which Vox appears a very hard Eurosceptic party, much harder than other versions that at the beginning, while they try to play the card of, well, we are very European, but we are against the Brussels establishment. And now they have adopted a much harder version of Europe integration as globalization, loss of the national identity, anti-immigration rhetoric, and so on. So that's regarding 15% of people voting for Vox. But the rest of the other 85% of Spanish people still are quite pro-European, according to all the polls. The problem here has to do with the expectation. That was your question. If you are, and has to do with this perfect storm that has been mentioned by Gilles 5 minutes ago. And also, when I thinking Eleonora presentation on Italy, she's absolutely right. That Italy was also a very pro-European member state very few years ago. So Italy may be a precedent, or maybe a reference for the concern that we have to have in Spain regarding the evolution in the next years. A country with a very strong pro-European sentiment may change rapidly that feeling, and if you have now a new crisis linked to the pandemic, and you have in the left wing Podemos, even in the government, but trying to play the card that Brussels or the European Union is not has not shown economic solidarity with Spain, and they did it in last March, last April to some extent. If you look to Vox, and they are able to to win support coming from the Conservative Party. If you look also to the Catalan nationalist parties, that this feeling of frustration connected to, again, to the economic crisis, but also to the push for independence 10 years ago. So, well, we can have also a perfect storm in Spain. And the paradox is that this eruption of Euroscepticism in Spain is very much linked to a very pro-European sentiment at the beginning. So you have to, as a recommendation, I mean, what can we do? What can we do from the domestic point of view? From the domestic point of view is, has to do with the national conversation. So try to overcome this naive Europhilia and having less expectation in the European Union as the solution to all domestic problems in Spain.
I think that's a very good point. I mean, Spain is one of the 3 biggest countries in the European Union. And even if it is very much hit by this crisis, as it was hit by the Euro crisis before, but even the consequences of the current crisis are even deeper, and will be deeper for the society. There are many things that the European Union can do here, and it does help, but don't rely too much on the outside help only. You have to try and do it on your own. That's for sure. But this is not an asymmetric shock. I mean, this is something which we're all confronted with. We're all at one stage or the other moving into a lockdown. One last question, Nacho, if I may, because that's something that was sent to us. How do you see Catalan nationalism in that respect? Can nationalism really be pro-European and pro-integration, or is that a contradiction?
No, it's not a contradiction at all, and it's interesting that precisely as I said, that if there is some political symbol that you can find in the, I mean, when in the Christmas Christmas message from the King, in the rally of a Conservative Party, in a very, very Spanish nationalist also meeting, or in a Catalan or Basque nationalist event, is the European flag. So it's very interesting that you find across the political landscape. In the case of Catalonia, we have to remember that in 2012, so 8 years ago, when the pro-independence movement erupted, the motto, the slogan was Catalonia, new state of Europe. And this is connected to the Scottish message of independence in Europe that the Scottish nationalists have also used. But also interestingly, those in Catalonia opposed to independence, that we have to remember that Catalonia is more or less torn in two, and there is more or less 50% of people voting for pro-independence party and more or less 50% of people voting against. Those opposed, that by the way were the founders of the party Ciudadanos, a liberal party, very pro-European, they also use the European flag and the European messages to react to the message of the Catalan nationalists. So that's very interesting because it's very different to Belgium and the Flemish nationalism, or to Italy and the Pedanian nationalism, in which you have peripheral nationalism connected to Eurosceptic sentiment, but not in the case of Catalonia and the Basque Country, not at least in the mainstream of the. It's true that there are very, very radical parties in Catalonia and the Basque Country which are anti-European, but the mainstream is pro-European, and the mainstream of the opposition to nationalism in Catalonia is also pro-European.
Well, thank you very much, Ignacio. Muchas gracias. I think the whole panel today is just a mission impossible. Because there's so many interesting features. I mean, we could just talk for hours about just one country, and now we have 4 and more countries, which and only 60 minutes to discuss all the different all the differences and all the things that we have in common. So this, I mean, we've reached the end of the debate, and we have not even started it. But this is going to be continued. I would promise that. And the more we can dig into the characteristics of the national political landscapes, the motives that actually define those developments, geography, history, culture, political past, present, and future, the things that we have in common, the things that distinguish us. I mean, they're just examples of the variety and the diversity of the European Union. But I think what we have achieved is give the audience an idea of how interesting this issue actually is. And this is just the beginning of this discussion. And I think there's one.
They can buy the book. They can buy the book.
Yes, I mean the book gives you a good overview on everything that we talked about today, of course, and a quick overview. But I think that if there's one main takeaway today, and there are many, of course, but if there's one, I think that we have to talk much more with each other, and we have to understand each other much better to be able to reach compromises. And I mean, the whole European integration is about compromises. But if we don't talk with each other, if we don't understand each other, those finding for the compromise, the search for compromise is a complex, is a very complicated issue, and it's complicated per se already because of the diverse interests. Now there's one other question which was posed to the panel, and I tried to answer it, whether the whole project, the whole book project, can actually lower Euroscepticism within the European Union. And I'm an optimist, but I'm not that optimistic, I would say. Now, I would say, I mean, the project, as I said before, is about learning from each other, understanding each other, and using this book as a basis and a tool for bringing the discussion, which is only starting, for bringing the discussion to the different countries, and also for making a comparison possible, which is so important. What are the features which we have in common, and what are the differences? If we don't understand that, it will be very hard to work together. That's why I think the more we discuss, the better it is. With this, can I just at the end thank very much the European Parliament, in particular, again, the Vice-president of the European Parliament in charge of communication, Othmar Karas, but also, of course, the offices of the European Parliament in Madrid, in Budapest, in Roma, and in Paris for bringing us all together and making this possible. A very special thank also to the panelists today and the authors. Even if Jill jumped in, we're grateful that you helped us here. Jill, thank you for coming. Eleonora, thank you very much. Andras, thank you for being with us. Ignacio, talk to you soon. And with this, we will stop here, but this is going to be continued. Thank you very much. Bye.